The following is a special video presentation of the Hennepin County Library.
Hi, welcome to a discussion today with the Guerrilla Girls. My name is Jackie Urbanovic, and my guests today are Violet Leduc and Kata Kolwitz, and they are co-authors, I suppose I would call you, of a new book called Confessions of the Guerrilla Girls. Now, I'm an artist, a feminist, a humorist, and I have followed your work for a number of years now, and it's nothing short of a joy to be here with both of you.
Thanks a lot.
It's great for us to be here too, thanks.
The first question would be to talk a little about who the Guerrilla Girls are in general and what you've been doing, just a sort of a broad overview for those who may not have been familiar with you.
Okay. The Guerrilla Girls are a collective of women artists and writers and arts professionals, and we originally formed in 1985. We consider ourselves masked avengers who fight sexism and racism in the art world and in our society at large. And we do it with mostly humorous and fact-filled posters and actions. The posters are put up on the streets, mostly in New York, but also all over the world. And they tell a story about what's going on for women and people of color in the art world and how much discrimination there is.
Okay. When or how, not when so much, but how did it start?
Well, in 1985, there was an exhibition at the Museum of Modern Art in New York, which was called an International Survey of Painting and Sculpture, and it was supposed to be a survey of the most important art that was going on at the time. And of 169 artists, only 13 were women, and none were artists of color, which was, we were shocked. So women were very upset, and artists of color were very upset, and there was a demonstration in front of the Museum of Modern Art with placards and people marching, but we noticed that it didn't seem to have an effect that it didn't seem to have the impact that we wanted to have. So we began to think about ways to get our message across and point out to people what was going on.
How many of you sort of initiated that first discussion or the first, say, poster or the first
It was
ideas?
a whole bunch, actually. Some of us who attended the demonstration thought, there's got to be a better way. There's got to be a way to use more modern kind of media, savvy techniques, advertising techniques, word and image techniques to get a message across. And a bunch of us got together, big bunch of bananas, and very quickly the whole thing came together. The first few posters, the first poster said, these galleries show less than 10% women or none at all. So what we did was we found out first we did research, found out how bad it was. It was worse than we ever thought it would be.
Yeah, that was my response when I first saw your posters. Was it's worse than I thought.
Yeah. After the gains of the 70s, there'd been a big backlash against women in the art world. And then we went after one group at a time. We went after critics, museums, we went after curators, collectors.
And also artists who were showing in galleries that weren't showing any women.
Yeah, we fingered the men who weren't helping.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the galleries were full of artists. They just were. It seemed so clear to us that they were prejudiced against women, and we did it in this, outrageous kind of disarming way that got a lot of attention.
And the irony is that the art world is supposed to be this enlightened place where things should be even better. People are more sensitive to these issues than the culture at large, and here are all these philosophical, wonderfully thinking, sensitive men who just didn't seem, were allowing things to happen that were outrageous if you looked at the numbers.
Yes, which I don't think that people had been as clear about the numbers until you started doing that.
Right.
Well, the obvious question next is the masks. Talk about the masks and why you wear them.
You want to know about our masculinity?
Yes.
Well, we decided to be anonymous, and we did that not just to protect our own careers from any kind of recrimination, but really so that the focus would be on the issues, not who we were. You couldn't say, well, I don't like her work, so I don't think what she's saying is important. And we named ourselves Guerrilla Girls like guerrilla warfare, Guerrilla. And the story is that one girl who wasn't a very good speller once wrote it out, Gorilla, just at the moment when we were starting to get requests for interviews and requests to appear places, and it seemed like this marvelous conjunction, and that's how we became Guerrillas as well as Gorillas.
But the good part about it is that, you know, at the beginning, it was to maybe let us have the freedom to talk about things without fearing recrimination. But then, as time has gone on and we've become sort of media gorillas, it's also kept us, you know, humble and you know, kept us from being sort of egomaniacs.
Right. Does it make it easier to speak wearing the masks? Because I find that often I may have strong opinions, but except when I'm among friends, I'm afraid to speak out, or I hesitate insulting people or whatever, even if that's exactly what I feel. Does it make it easier to do that?
Well, sure it does. It's actually really fun to be in a mask. You can be anybody you want. And, you know, we found something really constructive to do with our anger. And if it takes a mask to get it out of you, go for it.
That's right.
Now, before I saw your book, I was aware of maybe 5 or 10 posters I had seen that were Xeroxes of Xeroxes of Xeroxes that had been handed down from one person to another. And I was surprised to find out that there were somewhere around 50 posters.
We've done a lot of posters.
That's amazing. Which ones are your favorites?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question. This is one of the one of the first ones that won us attention. The advantages of being a woman artist.
That's one of my favorites.
Yeah, we should read those actually, because this is the one. It's been translated into about 10 or 15 languages. It's the one that women everywhere seem to really identify with.
And not just artists, too.
Yeah, and it was really fun to write. I'll just read them. The advantages of being a woman artist: working without the pressure of success, not having to be in shows with men, having an escape from the art world in your 4 freelance jobs, knowing your career might pick up after you're 80, being reassured that whatever kind of art you make, it will be labeled feminine, not being stuck in a tenured teaching position, seeing your ideas live on in the work of others, having the opportunity to choose between career and motherhood, not having to choke on those big cigars or paint in Italian suits, having more time to work after your mate dumps you for someone younger, being included in revised versions of art history, not having to undergo the embarrassment of being called a genius.
Most
of
all,
course, getting your picture in the art magazines.
Wearing a gorilla suit. Another one that got us a lot of attention was this one here, if you can see it. It reads, "Do women have to be naked to get into Met?" And it shows sort of a classically famous image of sort of a courtesan lying naked, which is a great image in art history, only like us, she's wearing a gorilla mask. And the statistic was that...
So less than 5% of the artists in the contemporary section of the Metropolitan Museum of Art are women, but 85% of the nudes are female.
And the image was showing, you know, one of the postering and also the kind of interactive experience that people have with our posters on the streets, which is...
Yeah, people write on them, they send us letters, you know, all sorts of things happen. It's really, really great. The dialogue, definitely.
Right.
What are some of the more unusual responses you've gotten? Or can you name anything that was not expected?
Well, an Italian art critic wrote to us and accused us of being responsible for AIDS. His reasoning, I'm not sure exactly. We've gotten lots of mail from women artists. One wrote and said, "Dear Guerrilla Girls, I have a vagina and I'm very proud of it, and I know you are too." And of course, women write us, you know, in a wonderful way. We've had lots of people write and say, "Today's my first exhibit, and thank you very much."
Wow.
We've gotten a lot of gestures of gratitude, and also from, in the back of our book, actually, there's some of the excerpts from people who have responded to our work that include, Maya Lin, the architect, and Gloria Steinem, and Tama Janowitz, and all, a range of people who have connected in some way to what we do.
And also a lot of curators and critics who claim that we've made them aware of the neglect in their curating and in their coverage, and they want to do better.
What does it feel like to, I can't imagine that you had any idea the impact you were going to have when you started this. What does it feel like now to realize, the kind of visibility you've given to these issues and the impact it really had?
It's great. It hasn't been only us, because there have been lots of people working toward these ends, but we do feel that we made things a little better in the art world, and that's one reason why we've also done a lot of posters about the society at large. We felt that we'd learn something, as we get together and argue and hash out how to turn an issue into an effective poster. We've expanded to also cover other things. We've done posters about abortion rights and about Clarence Thomas, and we have a new one out on the street about Newt Gingrich. That's the headline of which is "Who is this slimy creature?" and talks about the hypocrisy in his life versus some of the
positions he holds, which are well,
sad, obnoxious.
But I think the other thing was that we, at the time when we emerged, feminism was being used in Newsweek as a dirty word. Like if you wanted to really, kind of tar somebody, you'd call them a feminist. And I think, we weren't the only ones, but we were part of a kind of a movement that helped, people see feminism in a different way, in the powerful way that it can be. So that's
a lunatic way, It was so unserious. We wanted to prove that feminists could be funny.
Right.
Well, your posters are inspiring, because I think myself and I think many women know it's bad out there and sort of give up hope that there's any way they can really change anything on a large scale. And what you've done gives hope that that's not so. It's very empowering.
Right.
And I think one of the most empowering things was the humor you used. How did you get inspired to go at it humorously rather than seriously?
We're a bunch of funny gorillas.
Those artists are a funny lot.
Monkey out of.
Yeah.
But actually, if you look at it in a way, at the beginning, it's funny, but we're just stating the facts.
Right.
And the facts themselves, I think sometimes when you just talk about the way things are, the absurdity is such that that's what the power is.
Yeah, the absurdity is so blatant.
It's not always so funny as ironic. We flip
Yeah.
things around and present it in a slightly different way.
Right.
It makes you look at it in a different way.
Right.
It's kind of a neutral, it's like you're expressing I don't know, it's like it's almost without a point of view, because we're just stating the facts.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But there's a twist to it that makes it,
We have
that
our
both
own
makes
style.
you laugh, that it catches your attention. I think we were talking earlier about politics and how often in the room there'll be a huge elephant, say when they're talking about budget cutting, and I was talking about the military as the elephant, and the budget that they're cutting is a mouse. But no, everybody ignores the elephant, and the wonderful thing you've done is pointed a finger at the elephant.
Well, that's
And
because
said, look at this big obvious thing sitting in the room, and nobody's saying anything about it.
That's because we can recognize another jungle creature when we see one.
Oh, God. Okay. So what does it feel like to actually be sort of a guerrilla warrior, for lack of a different term? You're out there at nights or odd times putting posters up, not only creating them, but there's some risk involved to getting them up and seen. What is that
particularly
like?
when you run into walls in your gorilla mask. That's the biggest, tripping on the...
No peripheral vision.
Have there been any accidents or anything happen when you're actually out there on the streets, or people seeing you or stopping you when you're putting them up?
Yeah, people always wave to us and smile. At first they didn't know.
That's wonderful. That is what
An accident of celebrity.
First
Right.
they didn't know who we were. Now,
I think
now
that
they
there is
do.
a certain, how can I say? I don't want to say we're doing this is we have our own methods of doing things, so
Yes.
it reduces the risk of
Right,
yeah.
right, of being
We've
seen
had a lot
or
of
being caught.
experience
So there
over the
hasn't
years.
been a story or anything about a time when something happened counter to what you wanted it to happen while you were
Well,
out there.
Today could be the day.
I know that's right, exactly right.
There's always a first time.
We've had funny experiences where people, you really can't recognize somebody wearing
Right.
a mask. And we've had some interesting experiences. One was, everyone's had the experience where someone they know comes up to them and doesn't know it's them.
Oh, God.
And that's very interesting. It's frightening, and then you realize that you're completely safe.
Right.
And we've also had interesting experiences in group. We do appearances all over the world. Institutions invite us, and groups of people invite us to speak to them. And there was one interesting experience where, because of the mask, it also hides who you are in a number of other ways. One we were doing with big turtlenecks. It was the middle of winter in Chicago, and I think we had gloves, and we were talking to people. And one of the girls, of our girls, started to talk about what it was like to be an artist of color in the art world. And someone in the audience stood up and said, "How dare you speak about artists of color?
What do you know?
You know, what do you know about it?" Because it
Assumptions.
also took away her
Her identity
identity
in
as an
that
artist
way.
of color. There was no
Right.
skin color. There
Right.
was no nothing.
Well, it's also an interesting assumption that someone would make that women doing political art activism would all be white.
Be white, yeah.
Yeah.
That's also
And
a very
we
interesting
make
assumption.
an effort to be diverse and to be like slightly more diverse than the culture at large.
Do you have any gauge on the number of Guerrilla Girls there
There
are
are
out there?
thousands. They're lurking
Thousands?
everywhere, in jungles and forests. Whenever you hear a,
We maintain that everyone's a guerrilla girl. They're just waiting to discover it.
Okay. How does say in another state that's not New York or not connected somewhere where somebody could get involved more in the group more intimately, how do they become Guerrilla Girls? Like, how could I become a Guerrilla Girl?
what we talk about in the book at the end is that, it's not so much like being a guerrilla girl, although we all are guerrilla girls, but it's also using, I think our message is that, with just these posters, as you were saying, that it made such a difference. And the idea is that we encourage other people in their own way to make a difference in their world or the way they see it. Because if everyone's a guerrilla girl, then there's just like one, like they're just like the same poster again and again.
Right.
But if we can be used as a spin-off or jumping off point for other ways of expression, that's the ideal as far as we see it. And there are other groups that have been, or to some degree maybe inspired, or they got an idea from things that we were doing. For example, just like Godzilla and of Asian Americans to have a group, and Sister Serpent in Chicago, and the Barbie Liberation in
God, I love that Barbie Liberation.
Yeah.
So they're basically doing similar kind of acts with the posters
Yeah,
and
doing
interviewing
terrific
and
things. There's Guerrilla Girls West in San Francisco.
But each one has its own, different take. That's what's so great.
right, and possibly different issues or different.
Yeah, and a different voice in a way
Right.
of expressing it.
Right. Now, one of the other things you touched on earlier, but we didn't talk a lot about, was you've recently, in the last couple of years, started doing posters about issues other than the art world. Can you talk some about how that got started and where you've gone with it?
Well, it's not just the last couple of years. I think
Oh,
it's
okay.
been longer than that. And we tend to go in and out. We don't do anything in a systematic way. People bring ideas to the group, and we try to convert them into posters, and it doesn't always work. So it hasn't really been systematic, but we have done some interesting things. We did a collaboration with a group of homeless women in a shelter in New York City, where we talked to them and made posters with them using their words.
I'm trying to see if
I
we can
mean,
see
one
that.
says, I can survive on the street, and this is what a woman actually says. I know what church will give me a hot meal. I know where to go to keep warm and dry. I know where to get clothes. I know a place to get cleaned up at. But I know I can't live on the street because men rape me. And different things people said. The Gulf War inspired a whole bunch of posters, including we were kind of interested in turning the issue around a little bit, and we thought it was interesting that in Saudi Arabia, such a repressive environment for women, and we were there to.
And the first female combatants were involved in that.
Yeah,
you know, that was sort of the irony, fighting for a country where women aren't allowed to have driver's licenses.
Yeah. So we did a poster that says, "Did she risk her life for governments that enslave women?" That was one of them that we did. We participated in a big abortion rights march in Washington, D.C. with a poster that said, "Guerrilla Girls demand a return to traditional values on abortion." And it pointed out that in the United States, it says, before the mid-19th century, abortion in the first few months of pregnancy was legal. Even the Catholic Church did not forbid it until 1869. So we're out-traditionaling
the traditionalists. That's wonderful.
And there's always a way to turn it around and look at it another way.
Yeah.
Next to this is one that
one
says...
of my favorites, actually. About Republican women. Republicans do believe in a woman's right to control her own body, and then there are these images of nose jobs and liposuction and other body control. Yeah, there's the image.
What is coming up? What posters or even issues have you been brainstorming lately?
Well, we just had this Newt
the Newt
poster, and then we've been focusing on the issue of tokenism, which is that there have been gains made in the art world in terms of sexism and racism, but the next thing that happens is that then there's a token gesture made. For example, there's a show, but there'll be like one artist of color or one woman, or and then people feel their consciences are relieved, so they feel that that's enough, and then they can move on. So it's addressing that issue, that it's not enough just to kind of throw a little kind of crumb to the, but we really still see diversity that represents the whole pool of talent that's there, because it's not just, there's so many talented artists, and I think Kata talks well about how certain ones just seem to be anointed to be the artists of the moment, and yet it doesn't necessarily mean those are the best, they're just for various reasons,
Well, I mean, what we've always been about is if you were suddenly thrust into the future and it was 100 years from today, and you looked around at the institutions and the history books and everything that had been written about art and the images that were available to see in the museums, we would like the museums and all those institutions and all those books to tell the whole story of our culture, not just the white male part of it. And that's how it's been in Western culture up until this century. And we don't want that to happen anymore.
Yeah, I agree. And it's also true that, I mean, the whole cliche about the personal is political, that art is also very political no matter what kind of art you're doing, because it represents who you are, whatever background or whatever gender you are, or whatever. It says something very universal as well as very personal about your life. And when that's excluded, you lose entire viewpoints, entire voices.
Right. And there's the world of artists, and there's the world of the art world. The world of artists is a world of incredibly diverse group of people struggling against all odds. They do their work no matter what, and they do incredible work. I mean, there's no lack of wonderful artists out there. The art world, on the other hand, has to make art exclusive and expensive. And their whole goal is to compress this wonderful group of artists into 10 people of each generation who will be perpetuated forever. And our goal is to make the art world more inclusive.
Yes. I think the big secret is that the art world is a business. And I think a lot of people, it's like, many artists, artists do it for love of doing the art, but the reality is it is a business and people are struggling to survive. And I've watched many of my friends who are incredibly gifted and have been at it 20 and 30 years, struggling to even get a show, and that doesn't bring money. If they're lucky, they sell a painting or two during a show, but it's sad to see the exclusion and how difficult it is. It's bad enough you have sexism, racism, homophobia, et cetera, working against people, but then you have that the art world is exclusive, and that this culture doesn't also, I mean, there's a whole other discussion, but doesn't support art in a real strong way either.
Yes, well, that's
Yes,
the whole.
yeah, there
yes.
are a lot of other issues.
I have one last question, which is, I'm a cartoonist primarily. Even my fine art goes in the direction of cartooning and humor. Do you have any plans to go toward exposing the graphic arts and their treatment of women?
Well, now here's a good moment. This is your opportunity
To become a
found
guerrilla
your
girl.
own group. You can be a cartoon gorilla.
You're right. Oh, there's something in that. There's something in that.
It's a great idea. And we
Yeah.
only did about 5 minutes of research. You know, it's easy to find the figures if you look for them.
Okay. Well, that's inspiring to know.
Yeah. And anyone, and people in their own world can do the same thing.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for being here today. Thank you for existing. Thank you for all the posters you have done, as well as I'm sure the artwork you're all doing on your own, which is probably also wonderful.
Thank you so much for having us. We're really happy to be here.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jackie.
Okay. And thank all of you for joining us today with on a discussion with the Guerrilla Girls.
A presentation of the Hennepin County Library.